Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hello there, it's Zoe Routh, your friendly neighbourhood Canadian-Australian leadership futurist. I love to work with leaders and teams to see what's coming and then pull together the plans, the culture, and the perspective to navigate future horizons safely and with much aplomb. That's my new favourite word. Well, on the show today, we've got a really wide-ranging conversation on all things mind. Wendy Nash is my guest, and she is a meditation coach for entrepreneurs. And she has a really interesting background. She has done a diploma in somatic psychotherapy. She has a bachelor's. Maybe we should have done some mouth training before I got onto the show and did the introduction. A bachelor's of psychology, and she does a particular practice of loving kindness meditation. So I think this is actually a really great conversation to have at this time of the year where we're setting the tone, looking to cement and embed really good practices. And in our conversation, we actually don't go into the detail of meditation practice. We talk about different aspects of it. So we explore a lot of the emotion of meditation, what happens in the mind when we meditate. We talk about different elements of deep listening, of building rapport, the psychology of power and our power orientations. So there's quite a lot that we range over in this far-reaching conversation about meditation, life, and the mind. Well, without further ado, let's do it. Well, all the way from sunny, lovely Brisbane, welcome to the show, Wendy Nash.
Thank you very much, Zoe. It's very lovely to be here. So first, before I start, I just want to say thank you to our listener for being part of this program. And, it's really easy to think that it's just me sitting listening to this and maybe someone else is listening, maybe they're not. But I'm not the first guest you've had, and you're not the first host I've had. It's a huge, great big ecosystem of podcast land. We're all part of this large thing of the technical equipment, the internet. Also, we have people around us that are part of us. So, I have a partner. I don't know your personal situation, but there are people around me who are supporting me in this. And really, humans have been connecting with stories and sharing and conversations since the beginning of time. So we are connected to everybody in the far past. And as long as humans are living and breathing and talking to each other, we are all connected to the future as well. So it's even people we don't like their podcasts. It's
they don't count.
They are still part of this because without them, there wouldn't be as many people. And we're so obsessed by numbers, how many clicks, how many downloads, how many whatevers. So everything is part of this large ecosystem. So I like to say thank you very much to our listener for being part of this, and also to you, Zoe, for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome, and it's a pleasure.
And the second thing is to say that I am calling from Caboolture outside Brisbane on Gubbi Gubbi country, which is kind of close to the coast. And the thing that I really like to acknowledge about the Aboriginal way of moving in the world is that, for one, they did it for 70,000 years as the longest continuous community in the world. So they've basically spent a lot of time thinking and observing and paying attention to how things come together, what works, what doesn't work. And to put 70,000 years into context, it's 35 times longer than Christianity. And I follow Buddhism, so it's not quite as long, but it's still a lot longer. And there's a couple of things I like to really recognize that are so important. One is Aboriginal cultures, from what I've understood, and I am not Aboriginal, is that they see everything as very related to everything else, whether that's the land, the rocks, the stars, the clouds, people, other animals. Everything is all interrelated. So we are not ever alone and unrelated to anything and everything. And we have this long lineage, so the strong thing is, unless you know where you have come from, we include our ancestors in our journey, our heritage, our forebears. They are part of, we wouldn't be alive without them, because I don't know about you, but my parents, they joined together to get me, and going back generations. And so it's really thinking about, well, where have we come from? What do we want to take from the past? What do we want to leave behind? And being very conscious about that process and saying, okay, so here we are in the middle of the past, and then future, we can go forward to the future, but really knowing strongly where we have come from, and here we are. So there we are. So thank you to the elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you very much, Zoe, for letting me do my opening.
Thank you, Wendy. That was a very complex answer to the question of how are you?
Yes,
and where are you?
Good. I'm good. Sorry, yes.
I didn't actually ask that question. And what I loved about your response and from the welcome is that being welcomed and welcoming is actually quite an extensive, complex thing. And I don't think we often pause enough to think about the complexities and the intricacies of where we are, who we are in the very moment. And it is both simple and complex, as you beautifully illustrated. I'd also like to acknowledge, which I don't think I have done on this show before, is that I am actually recording on Ngunnawal country here in Canberra. And I love where I live. I feel it's a huge honor and a privilege, having been born in the UK, grown up in Canada, and then arriving in Australia. And I love your talk about people and place and what that means for us. It means something different when you've had a long continuous history in one place for 70,000 years compared to someone who's like a tumbleweed blowing around the world. And so I think they're the same and different at the same time. All of us have a history and all of us have a connection, which is fabulous. And I think our conversation today is going to be magical, I'm suspecting, and who knows where it will roll from. So let's start with where I like to start with is, how did you get to where you are now?
I would love to say I had a great vision. I was really determined. It was amazing. But it wasn't at all like that. Basically, I'd been meditating for about 20 years, or almost 20 years, and I'd done a psychotherapy training. I'd done a psychology degree. I didn't know what to do with it, but that wasn't my main job. I had just a bread and butter job, and really it was a means to an end. It was certainly not a job that I felt passionate about, but it paid the bills, and that was always my goal with that job, is that it was just something to pay the bills while I got on with life. And then I got to this point in it all where I just was like, the employment market in Australia was very difficult, and I was living in Sydney at the time, and I couldn't get a permanent job. And I would apply for a job and it would be like a 3-month contract or a month-long contract. There were 3 of us going for it. Sometimes I'd get it, sometimes I wouldn't. And then I'd have to apply again, and then apply again, and then apply again, and apply again. And I was just broken from the brutality of that system. And so I had to stop and restore myself and find a way. And a really good friend of mine started his business. He had been going for a couple of years, and he said, I'm burning out, I'm exhausted, I'm irritated, I'm knocked off with my co-founder, I have no social life, I kind of starting to hate my job. Teach me to get more balance in life. So he thought, oh, well, we'll just do 3 sessions. And we continued for about 2 years, actually. So it started off really well-being and burnout, but it turned out I was really good with him, but I wasn't so good at burnout generally and well-being. And then another friend said, you're really good at meditation. So I was like, okay. And then I reached out to an acquaintance and I said, would you be interested if I did that? And he said, absolutely. And they're now, regular coaching clients that I absolutely help them with that. And it's been a journey of my own sort of shifting and changing how I do things, but also seeing that I actually have skill in this area. So that's how I came from it. And it's the first time I've had a job where I have enjoyed. It's beautiful, it's creative, and it's so nice to feel a sense of dignity in my work because it is a job that I really enjoy.
I want to know how a meditation coach actually works, because I'm a practicing meditation person as well, and I've done meditation training. And it seems weird to imagine a coach coaching me while I'm meditating. Tell me a little bit about your process.
So there's a few different ways. I change it according to whatever the person needs. So some people have a meditation practice like yourself, but it falls over or things arise in the mind and they don't know what to do with all that stuff. They're not Buddhist, they're not part of a community. They're just sort of on their own and they're trying to figure it out, and it's just sort of not really working for them. So then I help them unpack the stuff that arises in the mind, the egoic responses, the characteriological responses, dispositional, things like that. So how to understand what arises in the mind. So some people, that's what I do just for the whole session. Other people, I just get them to start with a meditation practice, and they're really keen, but they have a very wild mind. They don't want to join a Buddhist group. Their lifestyle doesn't happen that. They're not interested in that side of things. They have an aversion to being part of a religion. So I just teach them to kind of start to find the space to what do you do with that wild mind. And then other people, I do I actually lead a sit for them, and then we talk about what happens in that process, what arises.
That's really cool. So what I'm interested in what you said is some of it's about discovering, some of it's self-awareness. Well, actually, it's all self-awareness, really, when you think about what's happening within your mind. It's an aspect of self to explore. And the first question I want to ask around that is, what is a wild mind? What happens when somebody has a wild mind? And part two would be, what do you do with that?
By wild mind, I mean the monkey mind. So, those conversations where when I started meditating, I found it so hard to sit. And I was sitting in a group, it was before the internet. And it's where, and then he said that, she said that, she said that, he said, and I should have done this and I should have done that, and replaying those conversations and, oh no, that's not fair, and I really should get that done. Or people just kind of, no, that's not what I want to do, or planning. And so it's a lot about anxiety management and that response that we have to the events of our lives. I mean, you've been meditating for a while now. So when you started, did you find that you were sitting there kind of going, oh my goodness, I'm just like, I have so much conversation in my mind. Is that what happened to you in the beginning?
I think that still happens. I don't know that that's really gone away. The practice that I have, it's called Ascension, and it's about coming back to, we use a series of mantras as mind tools for that, just to bring your attention back to the mantras. And I found my brain is pretty good at saying the mantras and also thinking about other things at the same time. So that's sort of how my wild monkey mind can happen. And then with practice, it can just keep coming back to the mantras and noticing that the space clears a little bit. There's less distraction, and then there's it's a biochemical release or something where I start to feel relaxed. And that does not happen every time. Every meditation is quite different, and my teacher always encouraged us to bring a beginner's mind to every meditation and not to have expectations around it. So some are deeply relaxing, some are just like, oh my God, this is taking forever. And some are like, I have to end this early because my brain is just not settling. And so there's all of that. So I wouldn't say that at first it was crazy. I think it continues to be crazy. I think people have a picture that when you start to meditate and you meditate a long time, you achieve some sort of equilibrium. And I'm not sure that that's true. Is it?
I don't know. I'm not there. I'm like you. I do now start to have, I've been doing this for 20 years. So I do now have quite a lot of calmness in my meditation. Or I would say in the beginning, it was like this massive backlog of angst that I had never heard before, that once I started to hear, it really rattled me. And I didn't have a way of understanding what was going on. And I believed all my thoughts in those days. Whereas now I just go, yeah, it's useful information, but I don't really have to fully believe it in a way.
I think that's a really helpful insight, actually. What do you mean? What do you mean you don't believe your thoughts? They're your thoughts, aren't they? Aren't they supposed to be believable? What's an example of beliefs that are not really believable and that you can consider useful information, but you don't have to believe in them?
So this morning I was meditating, and so when I get into this real chattery mind, my thing to kind of work with that is to go, instead of just coming straight back to the practice, the training, the point of focus is to ask, what's the emotion common to all these thoughts? Because there often is a flavor to the sit, I find. And I just go, what is the emotion common to these thoughts? Leave it at that. So I don't investigate, inquire. I allow the kind of, the consciousness or whatever it is that is there, the other part that's not wittering on and having opinions about this, that, and all the rest. I allow that part to come forward and kind of tell me what is going on. But I just go straight back to whatever it is that I'm practicing. So I feel like I've answered part of the question, but you asked something else there as well.
I don't know. My brain's already moved on. Let me just think. It was about what are the kinds of thoughts that you might have that you can dismiss and not believe in. And then you talked about anchoring or just asking about the emotion that underpins all of that. So, from my own example, like some thoughts I might have that might be not helpful to believe is like, self-criticism ones, which you're such an idiot, you failed at that, whatever. Some self-critiquing information that might come up during a meditation. That's the first things I would bat away, or just go let drift away as opposed to violently bat them away. Is that the kind of thing that you hear from people quite a lot?
Yeah, that's just the ego doing its thing. I have started to take a slightly unorthodox approach to those thoughts, because I don't think it's helpful to say that voice is bad, it's a wrong voice, or I don't think that's a voice that's worth listening to. Because sometimes criticisms are useful. Like, it's not always kind, but I think that there is often some truth in there about, did I do that correctly? So there's sort of self-doubt in there. So again, I tend to go, my perspective is to start to look at it now as more like a toddler who's having a temper tantrum and going, I don't want to, I did a bad job. And there's some kind of very nervous energy about it that is sort of wanting to feel reassured, actually. And so again, I kind of try and drop it, sort of just inquire, well, what am I not seeing about this? Or what's the emotion underlying that? It's more like sort of emotional mirroring, psychological. I don't know if you have done much of that, but that sense of just sort of having this 2-year-old have a temper tantrum, but instead of sending it to its room or go and play in the garden or whatever it is, to allow that part of us to be heard and engaged with at an emotional level, but not get caught up in the arguing, so it's like a flavor of it rather than the action of it. Also, I don't know how to explain that.
I'm with you. It sounds like the meditation is still quite active, though. In some ways, it's like you have this 2-year-old tantrum thing happening, and then there's the investigation of the emotion underneath it. That sounds like a lot of activity compared with focusing on a mantra, or all these things happen regardless of the intention.
Yeah, I just find that when I do that, it's like everyone is welcome. So I don't really inquire with what is the emotion and go really deep in and keep going, hunting. So it's not about focusing and trying to investigate. It's a simple inquiry before coming back to the thing. So if the mind is just going, I'm a failure, I'm stupid, whatever it is, that's just the ego going, something felt off. I don't know what it is, but something felt like I perhaps wasn't doing what I could have done better or something. Is that true? Whatever. And to just ask, what's the emotion common to all these thoughts, or what is the emotion underlying this conversation? What's the emotional quality of it? And then go back to the mantra.
So that step of inquiring about the emotion in it, my understanding of some stress management techniques or ego management techniques is that by doing that, you detach a little bit from the force of the emotion. It kind of eases it off. Is that the rationale behind just making that gentle inquiry?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I didn't know that was there. So there you go. Always open. It's always good to learn. These conversations are always so good because I learn so much. Yeah, it takes the oomph out of it because that temper tantrum, that child is saying, I want you to listen. So speaking with a client yesterday, and he gets a lot of pain. He has a lot of physical pain. And that's a big part of his thing. And I did this thing where, I should, I said, think of I should, whatever it is. And he said, I should be pain-free. And he lives with a lot of pain. It's a big thing in his life. So I said, okay, well, what is good about that I should? What that statement, he said, well, it's actually got a good intention. I have it's a good intention. What's bad about it is that, I feel like I'm falling short. What is unknown? And then as we went on, he said, actually, if I didn't have pain, I wouldn't know that my body was unhappy. I wouldn't know it was distressed. And basically, for decades, it's been screaming at me to pay attention to me, and I have been ignoring it. And I'm actually now truly grateful for this capacity to experience pain because I see how valuable it is.
Wow, that's making peace with pain in a big way. And hopefully it does bring him relief in some way.
It might sort of soften the intensity of the pain instead of trying to fight that pain. He lives with chronic pain. I don't live with chronic pain. I have lots of twinges and pains, but it's not chronic like that. But yeah, it's a big part of his yearning. It's a big part of why we work together, actually.
That's a very challenging situation. One of the things I did want to ask you about was some of the work that you do as a psychotherapist. I think a somatic psychotherapist. You have a diploma in that. And also as a coach for entrepreneurs, meditation coach. You focus on building rapport and listening deeply. That's what we do as coaches. I know that. And the third thing you mentioned on your website was to pay heed to question syntax. So those three things: how to build rapport, listen deeply, and pay heed to question syntax. Let's unpack each of those in turn, if you like. How do you build rapport?
So I just want to say that I don't work as a psychotherapist. I have that and it informs my work, but I am not working as a psychotherapist. I work as a coach. Just there are lots of insurance reasons, and I don't work, for instance, with anxiety and depression and panic disorders, that sort of stuff. So just to clarify that's work for psychological people who work with deep psychological stuff. I don't go there. I don't do trauma or anything like that. So that's why I work as a coach, not as a psychotherapist. Somatic psychotherapy is a body-oriented psychotherapist, so one who brings the body into it. It's not just Freudian theory or whatever. It's like the body informs what's going on. So building rapport, I used to have a really bad temper. I was a really, really angry person. When I started meditation, my psychotherapist, she's like, you need to chill. People often called me a bitch. People hated working with me. My family relationships were completely disintegrated. I would crash and burn relationships left, right, and center. So that's where I started. And I like to talk. I'm a chatty person. I thought that meant that I was a good communicator. And I thought I was a good listener. But I wasn't actually. And because I kept offending people and hurting people, this is where I think I didn't realize it, but I actually have quite a strong sense of guilt. I feel bad when I hurt somebody, and so I think that guilt really saved me from being a horrible, that's what really shifted my direction, is because I felt quite guilty about the harm that I was causing others. I felt ashamed of my behaviours. So these guilt, shame and humiliation can kind of not be entirely negative things. There's a positive in there.
If you learn from them and do something from them.
Exactly. It's not good to have it as a sort of just what do you call it? Welling in it or something, Wallowing, thank you. You do have to kind of own it. So I had to start from the beginning. Well, what do I do and how do I do it? And I have done so many different types of communication courses, whether it's active listening and everything. So I would say that this book that I found is really good, and it's called Rapport, The 4 Ways to Read People by Emily Allison and Lawrence Allison. So Lawrence Allison is a forensic psychologist, and he works with terrorists and criminals. And what they do is that he evaluates, so he looks at recordings of interviews and looks at which ones work and which ones don't, and what are the qualities of the interrogator that give an answer that is credible. So it's not about waterboarding and torture and stuff like that to get an answer. It's about, you want reliable stuff. You've got money at stake. You've got people's lives at stake. You have to know what you're doing here. And there were 4 parts to that. And Emily Allison works with domestic violence offenders. So she also they work at the hard end of town, that's hard graft stuff. So I feel that communication, if you're in a softer area, I think we can think we're better at it than we are, because it's not so vital what we're doing. So that's why I like that particular book. And what I really learned is their theory is you have to be honest. So if somebody comes to you and says, I want a promotion, and you have to say, well, okay, I can look into it. I need you to be straight with me. I feel that these are areas that it hasn't worked out well, so I want to make sure that it's a good decision. I have 20 other people that I need to consider as well as part of the program. So it's honest. So it's here, HEAR, I'm going to go through. First one is honest. You've got to be straight and honest. It doesn't mean to say you have to be brutal, and it doesn't mean to say you have to disclose too much. It just says don't lie. The second one is empathy. And really what that's talking about is, if you're an employee seeking a promotion, so imagine the boss. So I'm the boss and you come to me. I have to then put myself in your shoes and think, what are the emotional challenges? What is the power dynamic of this? How old are they? What's the race, the gender? All those other things. Where does this person sit in the hierarchy? What would it be like for them to ask for this promotion? So putting yourself in their shoes. So that's what empathy is speaking to. A is autonomy. And that is really that it's up to the person to decide what they would like to do. So if you have that situation like that, it's like, well, these are the 3 options that I can give you. You can have a higher status, a higher position, higher money, or a different job title. I don't know, whatever, I'm making it up. It's really up to you. One of those 3, you choose which one is going to work for you, and we'll go with that. So it's saying their world. So for micromanagers, it's kind of the opposite of a micromanager. I'm going to make a decision for you. It's saying, this is your responsibility. And the last one is reflection. And you've done quite a lot of leadership development stuff. So I was listening recently to a podcast, and it was a guy who has worked on the faculty of MBA programs. And he talked about there's horizontal leadership development, which is all the different subjects. So you've got finance, business, human resources, legal, all that. So those are technical skills, just a bit of a smattering of all of those, enough to be able to have a conversation with the people who are real specialists in that. And then he said there's a vertical, and that is, how do you navigate a difficult situation? So inflation is insane at the moment. Cost of living is going up. We're going to have to manage this as a business. And I, as the CEO, need to be able to navigate that process. So it's my skill. So that's what that is speaking to. The second one is diversity. And that is, do you have 10 white guys over 50 who are all giving you the information, who all come from private schools and, good universities? Or do you have a real mix of people? And it turns out that when you're building a company, by the time you've got to 8 people as your starting core foundation, your culture is set. So if you want to have a very diverse culture in your business, you have to start it from like 2 or 3 people in. It's very, very early, you have to set that program. And the last one is reflection. And that is the capacity to introspect, to understand yourself. And he said this is where leaders are just poor, actually, because they're so like, okay, get a decision, do it now, we've got to go with this, da-da-da. But unless you have a good capacity to reflect, I don't think you're going to make good decisions under, a terrible situation. And I don't think you're going to be able to think about ideas that perhaps may be a bit strange or uncomfortable or left of center. So I think really reflection is a very important step in terms of leadership. So that's where that last one is. That's reflection. So it was a bit of a larger answer than you intended.
That was a large answer for rapport. Thank you for the book and strategy summary. There's a lot that goes into building a rapport with humans. And along the lines of, there's a lot to go into listening deeply. And my friend and colleague, Oscar Trimboli, has published his 3rd book, I think it is, and it's called How to Listen. And it's a definitive handbook on deep listening, actually. So I'm curious, what is your number one strategy for listening deeply that you deploy or employ in your work?
So I qualified as a psychotherapist, and so I'm used to really listening deeply. And what I found is that I was often asking people their emotions, and it wasn't appropriate. It was in a workplace. There was something I was missing, but I didn't know what it was. And in that book, it really said, what does this person care about? And it's actually under the empathy section. What does this person care about? And when you start to listen to what somebody cares about, then it's like the whole picture really becomes clear about what is going on for that person. So that would be like my number one. And just to go back to question syntax, which I didn't talk about, it is really just, it's the first sentence, the first word of the sentence. So there are lots of questions that people ask, which gives the impression that it's asking a question that is a desirable answer, so you can listen to them. But often they're not very good questions. So ones are, do you think we should do this? And that's a closed question and it's loaded. So I would say that's a bad question. That's not going to elicit an honest answer. Another one is, would you say, is also another one. It's quite loaded. Would you say that you, Zoe, are a good interviewer?
Yes, I would. So it's very leading, that question.
It's very leading, So instead to really focus on the first word in the question, which is what or how. And the other word that is really bad is why. Why do you think that you are a good interviewer?
Why is that a bad question? Just to ping that back.
Because it's quite blamey. Why do you think you're a good interviewer?
It's blamey if it's got tone associated with it.
Okay.
It's not if it's an inquiry.
Okay. I find it quite it's got a good or a bad response to it. Why did you choose that top to wear today?
Because I'm cold.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm hearing it. So from the way that you're using why, there's an implied curiosity that is judgmental behind it.
Yeah.
It's like, you did this. Why did you do that? Because I wouldn't have done it that way. And I'm curious about why you did it that way.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly, you've nailed it. Yeah.
Right. So those questions elicit like, it conflicts with my perception. So what is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's very hard to come back from that. You have to be a very, very skilled, I guess, listener and speaker to be able to navigate when somebody asks you a question which is slightly leading in that way. It's quite hard to navigate it into a more open space.
Okay. So my final question for you is, one of the things that you talk about also is power orientation. So I'm very interested in all things about power, how people respond to power, navigate power, control power. So what are personality types and how they relate to power orientation? What's that all about?
Yeah, that is a really big question, isn't it? What is that? So in that book report, it goes into 4 basic characters according to whether people are submissive or whether people are controlling. They're either under somebody and want somebody else to take the lead, or they want to be in charge and be in control. And according to how that intimacy is navigated, so whether they tend to be what in psychotherapy you would call a avoidant attachment style, that is, you avoid attaching, then that can be quite hostile and aggressive and narky. Or you have a more, what they call a monkey. So whether you have a more...
A monkey?
They call it the monkey character, which is somebody who's very friendly and warm. It's a very strange way of looking at it, but they explain it. But it depends on whether somebody's above you or below you in their own mind and how you respond to that. And the ego structures. I mean, I'm very interested in ego formation and narcissism and how that arises, and how as a developmental phase when we're growing, we all have this ego need because we all need to belong and be part of things for our sort of survival. But then there's a point where when we have good emotional mirroring, we don't need to hold on to that for the survival. We can actually rely on a more nuanced, open, soft space. But when people have an expressive, clingy character, which is perhaps a bit aggressive, which is where I came from, then often it can be this quite dominant, controlling kind of style. So I was bossy boots. That's what people used to say to me. Whereas there are other characters where it's more burdened and enduring. So it's all like, oh, well, I'll do it, but, I'll say yes to everything. It's very hard to say no. But then I'll be really burdened I'll be passive aggressive about not turn up, not show up, not do it, but not wanting to say no. So, and then there's another one, this is psychotherapy stuff, more to do with it. And another one, which is the sensitive withdrawn character. And that's somebody who has a physical disposition which is quite sensitive to the surrounds, but they tend to withdraw because it becomes very easily overstimulating. So of those, that tends to be more of a passive character, the sensitive withdrawn, so it's withdrawing and lets other people tend to take control. The burdened enduring often also tends to be one who does a lot of support work and supporting others and helping and caring. So it's really just the very socially dominant, expressive, clingy character, which is very oriented to taking control, being in charge. That's my experience. I don't know how that fits with you.
I'm interested. None of them sound particularly healthy. these power dispositions.
Well, everything has a kind of a. Well, I'm quite an expressive character, so I mean, I guess I think I probably have a negative idea of power. So I tend to say it's a bad thing, and so I've probably framed it in that way because I don't like that part of me that can be too socially dominant. So I disown it, and that's why it's coming out in that negative way. But there are positives and minus. Not everybody wants to be a leader, and not everybody wants to be a follower. And so sometimes you need someone to make a decision, and it's got to be done now. So it's important in that context.
I think it's also implied in the languaging too. I mean, there's a spectrum between submissive and controlling. The word submissive has negative connotations, and controlling does as well, as opposed to something you might say service and efficacy. So that might be two different words on a similar type of spectrum minus the negative implications. The phraseology, though, is that articulated in that book, Rapport, as well? Is this the power orientations in there or a different one?
So the controlling, and maybe you might say passive, so aggressive and passive. So they are both pejorative, but everything has a positive and a negative side to them. So sometimes it's really good to have somebody who wants to just go along with it. You need a lot of people to just go along. They don't necessarily want to make their mind up. If you have two people who are kind of wanting to be in charge, then that kind of can be problematic. But if you have two people who are very passive, that can also be problematic. It's really about complementarity. Perhaps the language is not helpful.
I'm good. I get it now. That's terrific. It's a polarity, and it's a tension to manage as opposed to a competition to resolve.
Absolutely. It's not about one being better than the other. Sometimes this one works, sometimes that one works. Do you have an option? What are you going to choose? How conscious is that? Yeah.
So I want to bring us back to meditation as a way of closing then. Meditation has been a big part of your life journey for the last 20 odd years. And what I'm hearing is that helped you move away from the bossy boots person that you were and discover more about yourself. What tips have you got for listeners now about how to start a meditation practice or deepen their practice?
So I did a retreat the other day, and with some beginners, people who maybe had a practice, but I hadn't met them before, so it was new. I've just moved interstate, so it's a new bunch of people. And I did this one, and they found it absolutely life-changing. Well, not all of them, but some of them. And what I said is, as you go through your day, think about a time when someone does something for you. Not to show gratitude, oh, thank you so much. Simply to notice the kindness that other people are doing for you. So if somebody cooks you dinner and they do the grocery shopping, do they go down the aisle and think, oh yeah, Zoe will like that. I know, I'll cook that for her. That'll be really lovely. That will be something that she will enjoy. So noticing that somebody who has taken time out of their life to make you feel at ease in some way. So it's a very kind of small meditation practice. It's not a long sitting practice. It's a kind of gratitude practice, but it's not got that, think of 3 things that you're grateful for today. It's a much more, as you go through the day, simply notice what somebody does for you to make your life more at ease.
That's a lovely reflection.
Yeah, so here, this sounds like it might be, I was like, oh, it is quite a negative way of putting it. You made me think, how am I phrasing things, and is it being quite negative, and what's my role in engaging with the way that I say things, and how do I feel about power? And it really triggered that. So I really appreciate that you highlighted to me something that was a blind spot to me. And although it was a bit confronting to kind of go, oh yeah, I do think that. I am actually a bit negative there. I actually appreciate that you said that, because it's made me really, that you took the time to care, about the people who are listening, and also to understand well what it is exactly. And so I really like that you questioned me on it. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome, Wendy. I'm not sure that it was meant as as a kindness, and I'm grateful that you received it as a kindness. And I'm thinking about, I would love for Rob to go shopping and pick out things and go, my honey would like that. And he does actually do that quite a lot. So I'm like, that's kind of a nice thing in my life too. And I like that as a recommendation generally, is because the more that you seek to see things and experience things, the more that you do see them and the more that you do experience them, and it changes the flavor of your life. And I think that's a wonderful note to finish on in terms of this conversation about the mind, our focus. We've been all over the place with it, and it's been delightful. Wendy, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of the adventures you've had of the mind and beingness over the last 20 odd years. So thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. You've been so delightful and so thought-provoking. It's really enjoyable to have such an engaging and thoughtful host. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Oh, you're welcome. That was like a grazing plate, I think. A grazing plate of meditation and mind and mindfulness and psychotherapy and psychology. It was really lovely exploration of what it means to think about people and to think about the mind and to think about how we are showing up in our relationships. And also, even at the beginning, when Wendy talked about the interconnectivity of all of us and everything that we do and how everything is interconnected, I think it's worth pausing from time to time and to think about that. And I often do when I'm having a cup of tea, say, for example, and think about the plants that were grown and were tended to by some humans somewhere else on the planet, that were cultivated and dried and processed into tea, somehow packaged up and ended up in the supermarket, where then it ended up in my home and in my pot that was crafted by some other artisans many moons ago, and that it was a gift from my family. When you start thinking about all the things that come together, all the human dynamics, plant dynamics, energy dynamics that come together for a simple experience of drinking a cup of tea, it is quite extraordinary. And I think humans are quite extraordinary, and I think life is quite extraordinary. And isn't it magical to stop and think about that and to savor that each and every moment? And I think Wendy's message at the end about what are you noticing? Are you noticing these little moments of kindness? And I think that's a lovely way to start the year and to start thinking about what is the flavor of your experience that you want to embed every day throughout your day. So that becomes your default energy marker for the year. And I think savoring kindness and noticing kindness is definitely a wonderful thing to do. So thank you, Wendy. That was wonderful. I hope you got lots of great takeaways and insights from our conversation about meditation and the mind. Would love to hear your feedback. Feel free to email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. I love hearing from listeners. I also love it when you share the podcast. Share it with somebody who needs this message to find out about what's going on with their mind and how they can explore it with a lot greater kindness and gentleness. And please rate the podcast and review it, because that word of mouth stuff, it really does make a difference. And the more people listen to the show, the better leaders we will have, more and better leaders, because better leaders equals better world. Okay, so you have a lot to take away and a lot to do right now. So thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. It makes putting the show together so rewarding when I know that it is making a difference to you. So in the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.